I feel like there's been a few different times when I've been discriminated against. Probably the most harmful was by an employer. I kept very quiet about the lawsuit, but certain facts did come out in the news, and I think that some of their clients left after the article. There's a larger subset that are going to go to a surrounding state for health care that's pushing doctors away, that's, pushing um, profits away from Wyoming facilities.
Greetings, and thank you for joining us in today's episode of the We Are Your Neighbors podcast. I'm your host, AJ Gold, and in today's episode, our topic is discrimination. But before I get into today's topic, I do have an announcement to make. So, the AJ Gold Productions store is closed right now. Currently, I'm going through a rebranding and trying to come up with a new logo design for this project. Speaking of which, I will have a voting post where I will post 3 different designs that I'm looking at for the logo, and I will let everyone vote on which design they think is best. I want to include you guys because I think, this is my project just as much as it is yours. This really is a project for the voices of our community, so I want to include you guys in any way that I can. With that said, during this closure, I will be focusing on producing these episodes. If anyone is interested in supporting this project, the best way to contact me is by email at ajgoldproductions@gmail.com, and we can talk about potential partnerships and what those look like. I will try my best to get these out ASAP. I have to admit that 2024 was not the greatest year for me. A lot of things happened that pulled my attention away from this project. But now that I'm back, I'm ready to create these new episodes for everyone to listen to. But that's all for the announcements. Now let's get into today's topic. According to sandyhookpromise.org, LGBT students face bullying at more than double the rate of heterosexual students. 43% of transgender youth have been bullied on school property compared to 18% of cisgendered youth. Notably, 29% of transgender youth have been threatened or injured with a weapon on school property compared to 7% of cisgendered youth. And why do LGBT youth experience such high rates of discrimination? I mean, I feel like the answer is kind of basic. It's right in front of our faces. When we have legislators voting for anti-LGBTQ legislation, that opens the door for us to be discriminated against and for the youth of the community to be discriminated against. If you listen to the previous episode with Wyoming Equality and Casper Pride, you would have heard that Wyoming passed SF 133, a bill that bans trans girls from playing in school sports. And Wyoming's not the only one to pass that. It's kind of a nationwide bill. But with bills like that coming through, it opens the doors for us to experience discrimination. And these bills are targeting the youth, mostly. But the thing is, not only youth experience discrimination. Adults experience it as well. The William Institute states that 46% of LGBT people experience workplace harassment or unfair treatment. Along with that, after the pandemic, 20% of LGBT people were unemployed, which before the pandemic, that was at about 10%. So it doubled over the last couple years. And the most important fact, 57% of LGBT people reported being discriminated against, motivated by religious beliefs. Which brings us to our next guest. Our next guest had her own experience with workplace harassment due to people's religious beliefs. a case that took many hours, lots of money, and a lot of hurdles, but ended in a way that came out positive for our guest. So, with that said, I want to thank Sarah for joining us in today's episode.
My name is Sarah Crystal, and I am 45.
So, what is your occupation? You don't have to tell the specific place, but just what you do for work.
I'm a veterinarian here in Cheyenne.
So, how long have you lived in Wyoming?
I've lived in Wyoming for 8 years now.
Where were you living before?
I was living in northern Colorado.
So, in those years, how have you learned to express yourself?
We do take part in like Pride Festival. We have a really close-knit group of friends who are also gay, and so we do things together a lot. Those are situations where I think we feel comfortable just being ourselves and having fun.
So, what do you identify as, and when did you come out?
I'm a lesbian, and I came out about 5 years ago.
So, what was the reaction to your friends and family when you came out?
Surprisingly, my family was pretty supportive. I was a little cautious, but they've been very supportive. My friends have been very supportive. I think the hardest relationships have been with my old employer and a couple of my daughter's friends' parents have been the only negative reactions I've received.
What do you do to find your community inside Wyoming?
I think my wife and I have found community through Facebook a little bit. We've also been privileged enough to work with other gay people. And then obviously meeting friends of friends in those circumstances has kind of widened our friend group.
So, do you believe that Wyoming deserves the nickname of the Equality State?
No. Oh my gosh, I had to laugh when I learned that. I do feel like Wyoming is a little bit of a difficult state to be gay in. I don't know where that first started, but it's certainly the Equality State doesn't feel like that.
So, have you heard about the anti-LGBT laws that came through Wyoming?
I've heard some about the I forget what you called them.
Anti-LGBT.
Yeah, laws.
So, with those laws coming through, how do you think that affects the LGBT community inside Wyoming?
Well, I think this is already a little bit of a difficult state to be in that group. And I think these laws are just, in general, making it harder when they do pass.
Do you think these laws are going to bring harm to the LGBT community?
I do think some of these laws will. I know of friends who have children who are in the LGBTQ community already have a pretty tough time here, and I do worry about long-term consequences of passing some of these.
So, along with the anti-LGBT laws that have come through, we've also had anti-LGBT groups like Proud Boys, Patriot Front, and Moms of Liberty.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think groups like that are affecting the community inside Wyoming?
I don't know about that specifically. I mean, I obviously feel the presence of a very conservative political view around here, and I'm sure all of those contribute. And I think it is a lot harder for people to feel comfortable being themselves in Cheyenne versus other areas because of that.
What is something that you want lawmakers to understand about the LGBT community?
We're just people trying to find love and family and friendships here. Also, I feel like this isn't going to go away, right? You can't stop people from being who they are, you also can't push every single gay person out of Wyoming. I mean, I think there needs to be a point where you kind of embrace your community as it is. Um, yeah.
Yeah. So with that said, do you think Wyoming is accepting of the LGBT community?
I feel like Wyoming in general may not be very accepting. I do feel like if you can find your niche, um, it feels a lot better to be in Wyoming. But I definitely think that as a whole, Wyoming is not very accepting and welcoming.
So can you name a time where you have been discriminated against in Wyoming?
I feel like there's been a few different times when I've been discriminated against. Probably the most harmful was by an employer.
So how did that employer's discrimination affect you in your life?
Most immediately, it affected my career. I was on one career path, and after this discrimination, mm, my plans to pursue this career path were destroyed. I also got involved in a lawsuit that ended up taking a few years to settle and a lot of stress. And, I've had to kind of restart my career at a different clinic at this point.
Was it difficult to restart your career after all that happened?
It was difficult to make the leap. I was definitely on a career path to buy a clinic, and that was my entire retirement plan. I had to take an entirely different career path. I had to work outside of Wyoming for a year because of that. And I've definitely taken a few steps back in my career.
Do you think with you being discriminated against, did that make you a little bit afraid to come back into the community of Wyoming and let your presence be known that you're just, someone trying to do their job?
Yes, the fear of coming back into the Cheyenne community as a veterinarian was difficult. Telling my new employer, fearing that some of my clients would find out that I was gay, were extremely difficult.
Have you lost clients since then?
I have. Um, Only a handful, I would say. I think the majority of my clients that know have actually been very supportive.
So, were you discriminated against based off of religious views, or was it just they didn't like you as a person?
It's hard to tell. My previous employers were very conservative Christian. So I do think that their religious views played a part in my discrimination, a big part, I would say. But I don't know what else was going on in their heads to cause what happened.
So, what do you think people can learn from your experience of having to basically restart your entire career?
So, restarting my career, leaving that situation was so hard. Um, it was my first position as a veterinarian. It was really hard to break away from there, but I have not one day regretted leaving. I also haven't regretted speaking up and going forward with that lawsuit because there were numerous people before me that left that clinic that experienced very similar things. And as hard as that all was, I don't regret it for a minute. And I just hope other people have the strength to do the right thing. They don't make it easy. The system doesn't make it easy to stand up for yourself, but it was worth it. It was worth it.
So, do you think there was a positive outcome to the situation happening?
I do. The positive outcome is that they were found guilty of it's called a hostile work environment now. Um, so they were found guilty, and I think this is the first time anyone has ever challenged them about their actions and discrimination. And I'm just grateful that it's out and that they've had to face the consequences of their actions.
Do you think by them acting like that towards you, do you think they lost business because of it?
I believe they did in the end. Um, I I kept very quiet about the lawsuit, but certain facts did come out in the news, and I think that some of their clients left after the article.
So, what kind of picture do you think this paints for people outside of Wyoming when they see stories like yours, where you were discriminated against, or other stories like Matthew Shepard? What do you think that says to people?
Um, I mean, stories like this, I think on the surface, make Wyoming, it, it's a negative um, picture of Wyoming that these things happen here. But I think if you dig deeper, I think the real story behind all this is that I do think these things happen everywhere. And the fact that my case went to trial and that I won puts a little bit of a positive spin on, yes, Wyoming might be very conservative, but at the same time, I think we are starting to make some progress.
So, back in 2020 or 2021, there was a local bar that put out a shirt that said, "In Wyoming, we have a cure for AIDS. We shoot fucking faggots."
Yes.
And it sold out.
Yes.
What kind of message do you think that sends to people, whether they're in Wyoming or within the surrounding states?
That was a heartbreaking situation, that shirt. It makes for a very unfriendly view of Cheyenne to other LGBTQ people. That was heartbreaking, and honestly, I limited my own activities outside the house for a little while after that. Yeah.
Do you think other LGBT people did that as well, out of fear that they might become the next Matthew Shepard?
I'm sure people thought twice about going out after that or during that. Yeah.
Why do you think there's no LGBT specific spots in Wyoming? Do you think it's because there's a fear of repercussion from the community?
Yes, we've wondered about this a lot. Like, why are there no gay bars here? Why do we have to go to Fort Collins or Denver to be surrounded by people like us? And I definitely think the Cheyenne community is resistant and probably not ready to allow that here.
Do you think any town in Wyoming is ready for that?
I honestly don't know enough about other towns. I mean, Laramie does seem a little friendlier in that regard, but I haven't spent enough time there to know whether they would have a gay bar.
So, with all that said, what do you think Wyoming needs to work on when it comes to LGBTQ awareness?
I would love to see more events for LGBTQ community members. I love the idea of this documentary that, we're just people. We're here. We're, living the same life as you. Sometimes I feel like people just need more exposure in order to be more accepting.
Wyoming, along with the anti-LGBT bills, they also passed a chemical abortion ban.
Yes.
How do you think that affects the women inside of Wyoming?
It's a struggle for them to receive proper care. I know that traveling is not easy, especially on the interior of Wyoming. I mean, in Cheyenne, we're lucky because Colorado's a hop, skip, and a jump away, but there are definitely places in Wyoming where people are going to have to drive hours to get that care. It's, I think, another reason that Wyoming is not a friendly place to live for young people. Yeah.
Yeah, do you think so? With all these bills coming to light, do you think that's going to draw more of the young generation away from Wyoming?
Yes, I worry that younger people are not going to want to settle here. Um, in terms of what we have to offer for social life, for political reasons, I'm worried that we're going to have a community full of senior citizens soon.
So would you say that that's kind of why it would be important for people to pay attention to local politics so that we're not voting for people who are voting against the best interests?
Absolutely. I Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not going to go down that road.
So another one of the bills is SF 144, which is banning gender affirming care. So do you know what gender affirming care is?
I do.
Okay, would you like to explain what that is for anyone who may not know?
So, gender affirming care is medical care that allows a person to receive treatment to make their exterior to match their interior, how they feel to match how they look.
So if that bill were to go into effect, how do you think it would affect the younger generation within Wyoming?
Again, I think it's a good reason to not live here. And, if kids have supportive parents and live in Wyoming and would like to seek that care, they're going to take them somewhere else. I don't know, I'm sure some of them are going to completely move out of Wyoming, but, there's a larger subset that are going to go to a surrounding state for health care. And, you know, that's pushing doctors away, that's, pushing profits away from Wyoming facilities.
So, is there anything else you would like to add? Is there anything you would like anyone who is outside of the community to know, or anyone within the community to know?
Just don't be afraid of us. We're just people, I've got a family, I've got a career, and just embrace us. That's all.
Thank you, Sarah, for sharing your story with us. It is stories like yours that make this podcast possible and why I created it in the first place. The main reason I wanted to give Sarah her own episode is because her story is an important one to listen to and to learn from. Hearing that she had to start her career over again in a new town due to such harsh discrimination is so heartbreaking. This is not a laughing matter. Her source of income was affected. Her relationship with clients was affected. Her reputation in the Cheyenne community took a big hit, all because of the way that she lived her life outside of the office. This shows that people are willing to discriminate against our community openly. But what I love the most about Sarah is that she stood up and fought for her voice to be heard. Like she said, the system does not make it easy. And truthfully, that's all we need to do is to fight for our voices to be heard. And whether this is a case of religious people using their beliefs to discriminate, it's up for debate, but I can tell you from my own experience with religious crazy people is that they will use their beliefs to justify their discrimination toward the LGBTQ community. But I'm not going to get into that in this episode. That'll be saved for a later episode. Because I know it's not all religious people. It's only a certain section of religious people who are using their beliefs. I've met plenty of other religious people who are very friendly to the LGBTQ community, who are at pride events, who are at drag shows, showing their support. And that's all we ask for as queer people, is just to support us by being there, even if you don't say much or do much. Just by not being one of those people who is standing on the street corner screaming at us. That is That is how we know that you're a safe person. You know, and that's all we ask for too, is just the same respect that you have as a straight person. We want that for ourselves. It's like our guest Sarah said, we are just trying to live our lives the same as you. You know, we are not scary people. But you know what is scary? Losing your job because you're identifying as LGBTQ. Going to a LGBTQ event that is supposed to be fun and lighthearted, only to be met with protesters who seek to harm us. What's scary is that we have right-wing politicians voting for anti-LGBTQ legislation, such as SF 133, banning trans girls from sports, SF 144, banning gender-affirming care for minors. There's also the Don't Say Gay bill. There's also book bannings, the banning on abortions, and the deportation of immigrants. All of these things that are happening right now to women, to the LGBTQ community, to immigrants, it is all discriminatory. Whether you believe it or not, these laws, all these groups such as the Patriot Front, Moms for Liberty, Proud Boys, and the Freedom Caucus, which I might add that the Freedom Caucus has control over the Wyoming legislature now. So if you're not scared, you should be. Because all these groups are hell-bent on discriminating against anyone who is different. They have their own agenda, and they want to strip away certain rights from certain groups just because they don't agree with that group. So, much like Sarah did for herself, we must do for ourselves and our community. We must stand up and fight against this LGBTQ discrimination. Write to your senators, write to your legislators, get in contact with LGBTQ organizations in your area, such as Wyoming Equality, Rock Springs Pride, Jackson Pride, Pride Cheyenne, Casper Pride. There's plenty all around the state to get in contact with and to ask, what are the next steps? How are we going to combat this? So with that said, I want to thank our guest again for coming and sharing her story with us. I hope everyone enjoyed what she had to say. Signing out for this episode of the We Are Your Neighbors podcast.
My name is Sarah Crystal. I'm here, I'm queer, and I am your neighbor.
I'm AJ Gold. I'm here, I'm queer, and I am your neighbor.